I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P and you're watching the Cartoon Palooza. Now before I go into today's review, I want to let you guys know that I started my Patreon campaign again with new goals and tiers that I think is worth checking out. I highly recommend that you go take a look at that page so that you can keep this show going. I want to keep this show going, but I'm going to need your support. So go ahead and check out that Patreon at some point, probably after watching this review. That's all I gotta say. Let's actually get into the review. So with the 60s, we had a birth of great sci-fi on TV and in the comics with the Silver Age of comics, but most importantly with TV. Granted, in the past when I talked about animation in the 60s, I talked about the dark ages of animation, which the more I think about it, kind of started into the late 60s and in the early 70s, where we got animation taking a dive for the worst. But in the meantime, in the early 60s, it was a start, it was experimental, and there was an attempt to try to do something special. And that's where we get a show like Jonny Quest. Prior to this, I have not seen an episode of Jonny Quest. I knew it was popular, but I never really got a chance to check it out for myself, which I'm surprised I haven't had a chance to do so earlier because this show is pretty impressive for the time it came out. And it was easy to catch up with. There's only 22 episodes, which blows my mind a little bit in another way, in that how can such a popular show with movies and revivals only get 22 episodes? Well, we'll talk about that a bit later. The show itself is about a team made up of a scientist, a strongman, and the two kids, along with a dog, going on adventures around the world, fighting monsters, dealing with technological advancements, usually followed with a stereotypical bad guy with an accent. It gets a little bit into a formula, but that doesn't stop the fact that there is a lot of action in this show. And what I love about the animation style is that it captures the right motions in the right time. On top of the fact that with the action, there comes the animation style, which goes to the credit of the production designer Doug Wildey. And the cool thing about it is that this show got me checking out his artwork, and it's actually very impressive. I would highly recommend, if you're a fan of the 60s era pulp style, to go ahead and check out his work. Definitely worth checking out. And it shows because unlike most animated shows, even like Batman's Filmation, which has a very similar style, you could even say it looks similar to the Spider-Man animated series that Hanna-Barbera would also produce, Jonny Quest really has its own style, which harkens to the style of illustrating that comic books had at the time. This is probably the closest we'll get in the 60s to having a motion comic made in the 60s. On top of the fact that the situations they get themselves into, while cliche, are very interesting and engaging. Every episode starts off with usually a silent scene where characters have to escape the bad guys. Take a look at this episode where we got a guy running away from giant mutated lizards with a sumo wrestler and a man-thong chasing after him. I mean, if that doesn't get you invested, I don't know what will. And it doesn't stop there. Despite the fact that the action is limited, it does utilize the style in ways where it gives motion to the right things. Characters pause when they need to pause, while at the same time maintaining that 60s era budget. If there are criticisms about this show, it would probably have to be the fact that it's a product of its time. Watch any episode and you're probably not going to find that many women in this show, which nowadays with political correctness in animated shows is a big deal. People will probably not get into that. Granted, this show came out before a lot of big movements happened. I can't really fault the show for that. I'm sure if it came out in a different time, as we've seen a revival which had more women, it probably would have been improved on. All I'm saying is that there's another revival for Jonny Quest, maybe in the style of Carmen Sandiego on Netflix, or DuckTales, would be very appropriate. Hashtag Jonny Quest today. Not to mention though, you do have a main character that's subservient to the other kids. Haji could be seen as like the Tonto character to the Lone Ranger, that I'm sure a guy like the guy who made that documentary for Apu being a negative stereotype would find ways to really rip into. But I'm just gonna say, Haji as a character is just as important as Johnny, and is just as important as Race Bannon and Dr. Quest. Each one of them have their moments to shine, so it's not like one is better than the other. Some episodes focus on Race Bannon, some episodes focus on Dr. Quest, some on Johnny, and some on Haji. One doesn't really outweigh the other. So rather than see it as being a negative stereotype, I actually think he's kind of a cool character. There's a lot of conversation about what makes a good action animated show. And for me, it's got to have great stakes and a compelling story and a great animation style. All things that I feel that this original Jonny Quest series has. If you haven't checked it out before, go ahead and check it out. I would say that this show is entirely worth it. On top of the fact that it's easy to find, despite the fact that there's only 22 episodes, that I really think goes into the production design of the show. It probably was too expensive to produce. So they probably figured, hey, once it goes into syndication, it'll make its money back rather than keep investing a whole budget to make these animated shows, or go into making other animated shows to come after this that don't have the quality of Jonny Quest. Granted, it was only 22 episodes, and I always figured that it was 65 episodes so the show goes into syndication, but I'm pretty positive that this show did in fact go into syndication. Probably something different for animated shows. Maybe. I don't know. And since we're on the subject of Jonny Quest, what I find interesting is that in a recent movie today, The Incredibles 2 homages Jonny Quest in a very interesting way, where the characters are watching Jonny Quest on TV. And I'll even go as far as to say that the last act of the movie homages Jonny Quest in a very interesting way too. Like most episodes of Jonny Quest, you've got the kids trying to save the adults after they get captured by the baddie. What happens in The Incredibles 2? The adults get captured by the baddie, and it's up to the kids to save them. So it's interesting to see how that worked its way into it. So comment below, let me know what you think. It's always fun hearing your thoughts. Have you ever seen Jonny Quest? Comment below, let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to my channel. Let me know what you think. It's always fun making these videos. I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P. Thanks for watching this episode on the Cartoon Palooza.